Thank you for joining us today for this virtual event. Before we get started and introducing our wonderful guest today and jumping into this Q&A, the Center for Nutrition Studies team would like to introduce ourselves to you. So hi, my name is Isabel. I'm a research assistant at CNS, and I will be helping moderate this Q&A event.
Hi everyone, my name is Chloe and I'm also a research assistant here at CNS. I will also be assisting with the Q&A today.
And hi everyone, my name is Colin Alexander and I am the Sustainability Content Coordinator at the Center for Nutrition Studies. I'll be moderating the Q&A chat function, but I will not be asking any questions out loud. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining.
Chloe, would you like to introduce our guests?
Yes, absolutely. It is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for this evening. Taggart Siegel and Jon Betz are both directors and producers of Seed, the Untold Story, the film we have all watched for today. Taggart and Jon have also produced and directed Emmy-nominated and award-winning documentaries, including Queen of the Sun, What Are the Bees Telling Us, and The Real Dirt on Farmer John. Taggart's previous films include Split Horn, Between Two Worlds, and others that together collectively capture the struggle of refugees and immigrants in America. Jon's previous films, Memorize You Saw It, made in 2008, journalizes his experience as an aid worker living with former child soldiers in eastern Uganda. Collective Eye Films, a nonprofit media organization, production, that does production and distribution of media and films, is based in Portland, Oregon, and was founded by Taggart, where he now serves as executive director, and Jon serves as a director of distribution. Welcome, Jon and Taggart.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome, or thank you.
Nice to be here. Welcome, everybody, wherever you are.
Thank you so much. So we can just jump into the Q&A. Everybody had a chance to submit questions to Taggart and Jon during registration, and the CNS team has selected a few for both of you two to answer. So first off, what initially got you two interested in seed biodiversity, and what made you want to produce a documentary about this issue?
Well, Jon and I have worked together. We collaborated for almost 10 years or more. And we started with the film Queen of the Sun, What Are the Bees Telling Us? And when we found out that bees were disappearing, we realized, if bees disappear, we could disappear too. And that was kind of the big wake-up call for me as a filmmaker. It was an Einstein quote that said that if bees disappear, we have 4 to 6 years to live. And it wasn't even Einstein that really said it, but it was in articles in environmental magazines. And it was just that one of those big wake-up calls, like, okay, this is my calling. I need to make a film about bees that I didn't know about. And when you open the box, that portal into another world that you don't really know that much about, and start exploring, a whole world opens up that is so important to our survival on Earth. And with Seed, the Untold Story, I see it as a trilogy, starting with The Real Dirt on Farmer John that was made in 2005. And that was about an organic farmer who turned around his farm and lost almost everything, but came back and made it a very successful CSA farm in the Midwest. So this is like a trilogy: The Real Dirt on Farmer John, Queen of the Sun, and Seed, the Untold Story. And Seed was sort of a similar thing. I remember coming into the office to Jon and we're like, what's our next film? And it was like the National Geographic reported that 94% of our seed, vegetable seeds available in 1903 have disappeared. And it's like, what? Like 94%? And, being deeply invested in agriculture and environment, that was a wake-up call again. It was like, I didn't know seeds were like endangered, like bees or certain animals. And so Jon and I started the film.
Yeah, I remember Taggart threw down a Xerox on my desk. You know, there's a period as a filmmaker where sometimes you're in between things. You've gotten your last film out into the world and you sort of have this what's next question, you know. And we were very much deeply invested in the environmental sector with the past two films Taggart made. And in many ways, Seed carried the same themes as Queen of the Sun. And so when he threw down the Xerox, and it was of the Svalbard Seed Bank, which is, if you've seen the film or seen it in the news at all, it's called the Doomsday Seed Vault, and it's in this island north of Norway, you know, just jutting out of the ice. And for us to make a film, there needs to be like a combination of the deep need and urgency of an issue, but also the imaginative impulse. You know, what makes this a visual story? And we saw that seed bank, and I said, there's something really deep here. Like, why do we need to keep our seeds in a bank? Why is there some doomsday vault in Norway? You know, it felt like a global story. And as we looked around, we realized that although a lot of films had been told about sustainable agriculture and lots of different aspects of it, no one had dove into this really crucial issue of saving our seed diversity. And so that was all we needed. And the rest was, you know, I don't know how many years, Taggart, 4 years, you know, from 2012 to 2016 to make the film. And here we are.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, I didn't realize it would take like 4 years to make this documentary. You guys kind of touched on this a little bit, but how has making the documentary, that process, changed you in any way?
You know, I think fundamentally it's changed me completely. Bees did that, first of all. Like, bees opened my heart in a way that was like, where you start caring for this animal or this sentient being that you normally, you can't pet it, you can't touch it really. But you're seeing the importance of this animal, this species that is so crucial for our survival. And I think that something awakened inside that, for me personally, became like, life is a pretty sacred place, and that I need to actually open up and have more reverence for the things that we have in the world. And bees was the one thing that I was afraid of them before, and I became very connected to them. And you get connected to them through beekeepers that you meet. So it's always a journey for me and Jon. We start this journey and we say, like, who are we going to film? And oftentimes we found beekeepers that were very much involved with the biodynamic movement or the organic movement, that actually had a more emotional connection with these bees. And I think that the same thing happened with seeds. We decided that we would film people like Lee from the Hopi Nation, who has such a deep connection to seeds that he says, these are my children. You know, so there's this love that suddenly, like, seeds became like this really amazing thing. Like, it brings all of life. And I didn't have that connection to seeds until I meet people that spend 20, 30, 40, 50 years of their life saving these seeds from extinction, carrying it on from generation to generation. So that was the opening that happens, and you can't go back to being your old self. It's just like kind of a new self that enters.
Yeah, and you know, you hear about slow food and slow farming, right? But seeds are like, you can't get much slower than seeds, in the sense that it's like generation by generation, this process that it takes. And I think what made Seed really unique from Queen of the Sun, and the way it changed me from looking at the bees, have an ancient history, of course, too, and we go into that in Queen of the Sun, but seeds, we were able to actually trace through the heritage. Every culture has its own seed heritage, and that's so interconnected to its farming culture. And to see the ways that has been disrupted, farming is not like, hey, the food that we get and how it's farmed is the way farming's done. It's like, no, there's an evolution of how farming has happened since the dawn of time. It goes back to like ancient myth. It goes back to religious traditions. It goes back to the Garden of Eden. It goes back like so far, and it's sort of holistically interrelated to everything, you know? And so I think there was a profound effect for me in appreciating the cultures and especially native communities that we filmed with in India and Mexico and North America, that just like I didn't pay the appreciation for that this film helped me see. And I'll just say one other thing too, which is they're beautiful. Like seeds are gorgeous. And at the same time that we heard about the seed bank, we also saw this coffee table book that was these really up close seeds, and I call it seeds as architecture. And it was just these incredible, you know, shapes and forms and colors. And I think that really impacted me in a deep way, that seeds are art.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer, both of you. I want to comment on that because the seed in the movie just showed the most beautiful imagery of seeds. Like, I had never ever seen anything like that before. It was really, really amazing to see, and it really speaks to your point about how we are losing these things, because I think most of us didn't even know that beauty in seed biodiversity like that even existed. So that was pretty amazing. So I want to ask this next question, which is, what are the positive roles potentially that biotechnology can play in working to maintain global access to a diverse supply of seeds? Like, is there that role for biotechnology?
I think that's the most difficult question to answer for me. It goes to the heart of the issue for me, that these seed companies are being controlling, like 4 or 5 different companies controlling most of the seeds of the world. So when inherently, when you learn from these seed keepers, the indigenous seed keepers around the world, from India to Mexico to North America, we really found that seeds being patented and owned goes against all of life. So for me to be open for that sort of subject is really difficult for me. I just have to say that we've had people in the audiences that are biotech people, and I respect what they're doing, but it goes against almost my whole values in life, which is to be controlled by big corporations that control seeds that come from hundreds of years, thousands of years of people handing these seeds from generation to generation. And then for it to be suddenly controlled in the last 50 years by a few handful of companies, I wish I could be more open, but I'm not. So
I think one of the challenges too, you know, Bill Mcdormand in the film is somebody we talked a lot about this issue, because he works in a very practical setting, sort of in the intersection between a lot of academics and seed savers, grassroots seed savers. And when you get, you know, in that space, there is obviously a lot of academic research in biotech. A huge amount of the academia and biotech is feeders for large corporate contracts, you know, grabbing people up from Cornell and other places. And so, unfortunately, a lot of our experience with a lot of the biotech in practice is that it's used to create seeds that are resistant to pesticides and other chemicals so that we can spray in larger quantities and continue the practices that are destructive to the environment. So I think the onus is a little bit on the biotech system to prove that it could actually use biotech in some responsible fashion. And I think that's a very uphill battle, because you've got issues of consent with communities where biotech is being implemented. A good case study, if people want to look into it more, is like GMO papaya in Hawaii, you know, and that these are like trying to be rapid deployment for disease resistance, but in some ways solving the immediate problem opens the gateway for corporate control and IP over the seed stock that, yes, was it a problem that the papaya was really exposed to this particular bacteria? Yeah, but that was also a result of monocropping. And so like, in some ways, systems have to, it's just this hard balance. I am for the farmer, but at the same time, the farming systems have to shift, and we can't just continue to use biotech to push into a more fragile system bigger and bigger, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That's a really, really good point. So we actually got a question in the chat that's really relevant to these points that you've been making. And so the question is, were you threatened during the documentary or after its release by companies like Monsanto or other corporations, or anything you had to face which wasn't expected?
I think we're too small and under the radar and not threatening enough for them to start sending emails or calls. We did think we would encounter more when the film came out, especially the publicity and being in theaters around the country and hundreds of screenings and film festival awards and on television. And the closest we came to it was we had this big interview for BBC all set up, and it was all lined up. We were very excited about it because it was going to possibly open in London or England, and the interviewer had to cancel it right at the last minute. And it was kind of like, well, why? So our publicist investigated and kept asking and asking, and finally they said, well, sorry, BBC is funded in part by Monsanto, just, you know, and so I realized, wow, this is not fully free speech. So it came in those kind of forms, like where we, like Rotten Tomatoes, I think, I don't know what we are, 94%, something like that. It's really high, but there's one review from New York Times that was like destroyed the film. And that's fine. Because it sounded like it was really pro GMO, and that's fine. And I do think that we intentionally, John, don't you think that we intentionally didn't take on Monsanto directly? We're not that kind of filmmaker that like, okay, let's go to their door, knock on their door and try to get them to say why GMOs are good. In some ways, maybe it would be a more rounded film if we allowed that in. But in 90 minutes, you only have so much real estate. And if you want to get in deep stories from different cultures and people, you don't want to fill it completely with, I see it as the toxic GMO system that has been, you know, put into many films before. So we didn't want to repeat that.
No, I think that's accurate. You know, when we set about to make the film, we had to deal with, okay, there's so many issues with seeds, what are we going to actually talk about? And in fact, you can't not talk about the GMO issue, but in large part, when you watch the film, you'll notice that our general approach to biotech and GMOs was really addressing this issue of pesticide use and the destructive practices of monocropping and like how it's against diversity. So really, we kept seed diversity at the forefront, because you can go down a rabbit trail on a film and realize like the story is not cohesive. You know, this was not an investigative reporting film. We were dealing mostly with characters that were part of these issues, but not necessarily like the front lines. You know what I mean? We weren't like a 60-minute expose. This was information that we were putting together as a cohesive story, because our main purpose in this film was not simply to attack, but to inspire people to engage in some of the very positive aspects of agroecology and embracing biodiversity. I think people get kind of used to like, oh, if I watch a documentary, it's going to be a downer, right? Like you sit down on a Friday night with your friend, like, but it's not always on everybody's mind to go watch a documentary. Maybe for this audience it is, but in general, that's how they view it. And if you watch Seed, you'll realize this is a film that really is about enjoying the natural world. In some ways, an unusual blend. It's kind of I haven't seen a lot of films in the style that Taggart and I have worked. We did this with Queen of the Sun too, but it's really trying to blend the beauty with the issue so that you come out kind of inspired and not simply depressed, even though there is definitely a place for investigative reporting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that struck me as well is like just how beautiful the documentary was. And I think Taggart mentioned this earlier, but like the beauty of like the Native American farmers and how they're talking about corn and like it represented their ancestry and like their mothers and their sisters and their children. I thought that was really beautiful as well. And definitely was not a downer like most documentaries. But actually, we had another live question come in, and this might get back to like the downer issues, but it could also be positive. What connections surprised you most between government and company control over seeds and the agricultural practices?
I think we dove into this in two places in the film really deeply. One was in the story on Hawaii, and the amount of local action that's taken place there, and also in India. In India, it's a little harder to connect just because we're, removed language barrier. There's more filter that you have to get through. But with Hawaii specifically and in unearthing these local stories, I think the biggest challenge was between the voice of people in their own communities and the lack of agency to speak to the larger systems, and the larger corporate interests. And I think there's some problems there. I think one of the things we're learning as activists in the communities of, environmental activism and people who care about health and all of these, you guys are all connected in this intersection, is that it's really important to have good information. One of the downsides of some of the activism at the time of our film, in retrospect, and this is with a few years to look back on it, is whenever a movement emerges, there's a lot of misinformation that comes with it, and that actually damages you. Just in the way that some of the protests, the violence damages the impact of the protest, because now people just talk about the violence, right? It takes away from the issue. And I think a lot of people in some of these issues, the GMO issue got complicated because people started to have misinformation about it. And then the biotech companies would say, well, these people are just idiots. They don't know what they're talking about, And I think for us, it was seen, okay, well, what happens then is a war with like these sound bites, and they're reacting and they're reacting, but the actual communities are generally unheard, and they're trying to fight these local battles through. In Hawaii, it was through local initiatives and the whole local political system that, as people, like when we see on the national news, isn't that. So we don't get very locally civically engaged. We tend to be about like the big issues, the president, the big, Supreme Court, the big Senate things, but like, the reality is I found in this film that a lot of the action, just like farming, in seed sovereignty starts at a very, very local level. It's unglorious, it's not beautiful, but it's surprisingly important. And some of the true heroes you see in the film, like Gary Hoosier in Hawaii, nobody's ever necessarily heard of him, you know what I mean? But he's doing really important work on the ground. Does that kind of answer some of what you're looking for?
No, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would add to that, just John, that was great because we really saw on a local level, like how a mayor could get in Hawaii and keep the biotech companies there, because the biotech companies are getting a lot of the politicians into the government to keep those corporations in place. And it's, one film could deal with the whole history of Hawaii and plantation culture of all the sugar cane and how that collapsed. And then the biotech companies just kind of came in and leased the land from missionaries, families that own the land from when they came in and took over Hawaii. So it could be a whole film. And so that's the challenge that Jon and I had, was just like, okay, we want to just be right in this area, but we have to move to another location and see what's happening in places like Mexico. And that's where the Green Revolution gets really complicated, like with NAFTA and everything. And then the thing that really upset me, I think, the most about that was that America went in and dumped a lot of our seeds, subsidized corn in Mexico, which made it cheaper, so cheap that the local growers, the really small indigenous growers, didn't make enough money because U.S. subsidized the corn, and they were actually sending, you know, GMO corn into Mexico for feedlots and things like that. And but it got to the heart of the issue was, wow, we're sending GMO seeds or very chemical seeds back to the heart of where corn originated, in Oaxaca region. It's like, and all these small farmers that were just growing the most beautiful seeds, and we witnessed some of that, but it was almost like a dying tradition, because so many farmers were losing their land or their ability to farm. And that same issue goes to India too. And we just have to know that, as Vandana Shiva said, that, you know, 80% of small farmers are what's keeping us going. Even though there's big corporations out there, it's the small farmer that really sustains the world.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned India, because India is actually, you know, like a lot of the things that were relevant in the seed are unfortunately still really relevant today. And now you have, you know, these farmers protests in India. And so I wanted to ask, how does the current situation of the protests in India relate to the larger issue of seed biodiversity and seed freedom? Like, as you were talking about it a couple years ago, but how has it, you know, continued to be as much of an issue today, and like what are they really, you know, concerned about now?
Yeah, you know, we're not as up to date on some of those things as we would like to be, just because the film's been out for a little while now. So fortunately, I did see that and had a chance to look into a little bit. And I'm not an expert on it, so I'm sure that, like all things, these are very complicated, you know, political, economic concerns. But I think what I realized is that, you know, in Seed there's a fairly substantial scene following a character named Suman, who's a, oh, hello kitty, that's a native Indian woman, and she tells the story of these farmer suicides, you know, and how India has a history of having just there's 250 million farmers in India, like, and they're generally the industrialization process requires putting these farmers into immense debt so that they can compete with the international farm system, like you would see in the average Midwestern farm these days. In the United States. And so this is simply prohibitive. It's not like a one-to-one. It's not like you can suddenly fast forward India into modernity with the flip of a switch and the right economic. You end up disenfranchising massive communities of farmers who are, if not subsistence farmers, closer to that style of farming, right, than what we think of farming. And so you have the farmers that go heavy, leverage themselves into debt. And then what happens is you have a drought year. You have price competition. Like, what I think the issue is fundamentally around the opening up of trade and certain laws and farm bills that would hurt the local farmers' both control, ability to sort of plan with their own communities how they're going to do things, and open them up to a market that, look, in the United States, the reason farming works is because the government subsidizes it extremely heavily. Like, you talk to an average farmer and they say, this would never make sense if I didn't get heavy subsidies to support the farming that I do. And so in India, without those same structures set up, you're just going to threaten the livelihood. And when they get heavily leveraged like that, and they're in extreme debt, and then they have a bad year, but in that culture, there's an honor shame culture, and in that culture, that they end their lives, right? Rather than to deal with the debt or pass it on to family members or whatever. And the banking systems aren't what they are in the US. And so that, all to say that that story in the film, I think, is very relevant. It is still relevant to the current crisis because you know, these farming communities are relatively similar. They don't change quite as rapidly, you know, as what we have here. And so, you know, if people want to look more into that issue, voices like Vandana Shiva has long been a supporter of farming communities in India. She is Indian, but also a person who we like a lot, Raj Patel, who's an academic and writes a lot about these issues, is also fantastic to look into.
And I would add to that, like Suman is, once again, she's somebody that I felt was the most amazing woman, who really, all odds against her, nobody would support her. She had to hide the seeds from her local seed source because her brothers wanted to use hybrids and they went into debt, and there was even talk of suicide, and other farmers around were committing suicide. And she knew, something deep inside her knew, that she needs to save these seeds. And she's 16 years old, saving the old seeds that actually saved her whole village, because she convinced them that these seeds bring us more nutrition and more diversity and more sustainability for the village than hybrids that require a lot of inputs. And that's what we found in India. A lot of the farmers got fooled into thinking we need to buy these inputs like chemicals to put on the soil, or we have to now buy, instead of do it by hand, we have to have a tractor or do it with a horse pulling the plow. And they just got more and more in debt. And these inputs, you know, as you might have already studied, have so much impact on the soil. So, I mean, it kills the soil microbes and all the nutrition that's in a soil that comes from how they used to do it, which was, you know, the buffalo compost that they would mix into the soil. Just has so much energy and vitality. And if they start putting the inputs in, then these chemicals kill the soil, and then even carbon sequestration, like carbon doesn't go into the soil anymore because the soil is dead and there's not as much humus and everything. And so I feel like the soil, if we really look at the soil as one of the biggest issues, almost beyond seeds, I mean, you need healthy seeds and you need healthy soil to really have a abundance out there. And we have to rebuild the soil, because most soil has been damaged and destroyed by these harsh chemicals that are put on, and pesticides and things. And there's been so much pesticide poisoning for a lot of the people around the world, we saw, but in India especially. And you would see these cans and bottles of chemicals in the fields that weren't organic. It was like companies like Bayer are very much, or Monsanto, very much in India.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that answer. And I think, yeah, definitely soil is so important, in addition to seeds, because I mean, it's like the thing that actually grows our food and everything. around us. And getting into our next question, I think you guys touched on this, that this movement around seeds and supporting biodiversity is really largely like unglamorous. It's very grassroots. But I was wondering if you guys had any advice for those of us who have limited access to land or local food, such as people living in apartments, urban areas, or food apartheids. How could we be able to support native and non-GMO seeds? And this kind of relates to a live question that we got asked. Should we all be collecting seeds or be beekeeping, or how many people should be really participating in these activities to create some sort of like global change?
Well, I'm really excited that anybody could be saving seeds. If you're in an apartment and you have a little pot, if you get seeds that are from companies that are not patented, especially like territorial seeds or turtle. There's a biodynamic seed company, turtle. What's it called? And then there's Turtle Tree, territorial seeds. There's the Hudson Library.
Hudson Valley Seed Library.
Hudson Valley Seed Library, and all these seeds. Even if you have one little pack of seeds, you could have a lot of fun with it, and then actually save your tomatoes if you're growing it in a pot, or even potatoes you could grow in big containers, or arugula. And the arugula seed, you've probably grown arugula. It grows so fast, and then it goes to seed, and then suddenly you have a million seeds. And I think it's really fun. My excitement comes year after year. I'm growing certain squashes that I've gotten. One, I don't know if you remember in Seed the Untold Story, it's called Goto Okasaman, and that's the one that Winona Ryder, Winona LaDuke saved. She got to name it Goto Okasaman, which means groovy seed, and normally men name seeds, and she was able to name it. And supposedly the story is that it was 800-year-old seeds found in a burial site in a clay container. And these seeds, it's the most beautiful squash. It's like radiant red and orange and very long. And I've been growing it. I received the seeds from a friend who received it from another friend. And so it's just been passed down. And so now I give my seeds away. And every year I get very excited. Like right now, 60 degrees today. And I was just like, okay, I got to start, putting up my little, it's a very small little nursery that I set up, and I start planting the seeds. And then, by May or June, they're quite large, and I start planting them. And I feel very connected when I do that. There's just something that changes my connection with the earth when I start saving the seeds. And yes, I have too many seeds. Yes, I try to give them away. Yes, some of them rot, and like, oh my God, what am I doing wrong? I didn't dry them well enough. So it's an ongoing thing. I'm a beekeeper because I learned from the beekeepers, and I said, well, I don't want to just make films. I want to be a beekeeper, and I also want to be a seed keeper, but I also want to learn how to make soil. And all these things connect me much more deeply to the earth. And I do think people could do it on a small basis. You could actually, Jon, you turned me on to the worm castings, like the box where you started saving, your compost. You put the compost in and make seed worm castings. And in my compost right now, I have millions of of worms right now, because I just been feeding it all the, I had chickens, and I used to give the chickens all the scraps to eat. So my compost wasn't nearly as rich as it is now, because all my scraps go to the compost, and I've never seen more worms. So hopefully in the spring it'll be like just luscious soil.
Well, you know, that connection point you make, I think, is really key. First of all, like, we have to remember that if we don't enjoy things, we don't do them. And if we don't enjoy things often, we don't appreciate them and spend time on them. And so just the act of saving seeds and keeping a little planter on your windowsill, or, you know, indoor plants are big now, you know, like keep an indoor plant, actually learn how to do it. It's not as easy as you think sometimes, you know. And I think in an apartment, I would extend it to this too, and say that connective point that Taggart's talking about can be embraced in a communal level. Just because you live in an apartment doesn't mean you can't support community urban gardens, you know. And so I would, and especially in food deserts, especially in places where, you know, there's big movements now in communities to gather people around, civically engage, and say, like, let's start an urban garden. Let's turn Deep Have as an organization in Portland, Oregon, where we are, which is, you know, let's turn concrete into soil again, you know. And so I would encourage anybody who's really in these food desert places to start on the community farming level, because then you can engage kids, you can engage the next generation, you can bring light into it. So it's not simply, and I mean that emotionally, you know, you can lighten things up a little bit for people. Because yes, we can also engage in, you know, different ways to protest and let our voice be heard, whether that's petitions or different things. And in the film, we recommend Center for Food Safety, and of course, there's many others that you can engage with these issues, and they can help you understand how to vote, maybe who to vote for. And those are all important, but they're so abstract. You know, I think it's much more important that, especially if you're in a small place, or you're in a very urban area, or a place that is in a poorer area, and just the things that you know, you can see it in Portland. You've got certain areas that have the Trader Joe's and the New Seasons and the Whole Foods and that, tons of community gardens. And then you get out on the east side of the city and it's totally different, you know. And in those areas, they need people that are excited about this to champion bringing those spaces and doing community education. So there's lots of ways that I think you can get involved that are specifically around the seeds. The last one I'll say is that there's a movement to start local seed libraries. This is actually a great way to serve and create equality and equity, which is, these can be just like you check out books from a library. You save seeds from your plants for the year, you give them back to the library, then they're there to check out and plant and save and return 100 times more than you planted, right? And this is free, you know, so it's truly serving communities where it might be more cost prohibitive to buy $4 seed packets, or, you know, of some of these more heirloom varieties, you know, and you could get them for free, you know, it's accessible. The last thing I'll say too is, Taggart, you mentioned patents. Generally with garden seeds, you don't have to be concerned about patents. Those are generally on the large bulk mega corporation farming seeds, GMO seeds. But you do have to think about hybrids. You can't save a hybrid the same way you can save an heirloom. So if you are going to dive into the heirloom game, just make sure that you're not trying to save hybrids, because they won't save.
Wow, thank you so much. You know, one of the things I really love about the movie is that, at least for a person who has absolutely no gardening or growing experience, it somehow has convinced me that I need to keep seeds. I don't have anything to do with seeds personally, but you have convinced me that seeds are, if anything, a survival currency. You know, it's really like a really amazing and important thing for people to learn, especially in relation to, you know, themes like food sovereignty and, you know, being able to build like resilient food systems. And so I love seeds so much for that. I want to ask a question that was submitted. How do you personally introduce the topic of seed biodiversity or freedom loss with people you think do not have an interest or background in the topic? How do you explain to them the gravity of the problem without having to watch the whole documentary?
Well, you know, a lot of people, most people really aren't aware of what they're putting in their bodies. And I think that there's very little education around that. And it's very hard to just eat organic because it's possibly more expensive, or we think that there's no difference between organic and something that's non-organic. And I have to say, if you care about yourself or your system or this earth, then you need to care about where your food comes from. So if it's organic, and the organic industry is not perfect in any means. I mean, they've watered down organics somewhat, but you could take it to the more grand scope of beyond organics, which is biodynamics, which is where there's lots of inputs, really healthy connections to the soil. They make the soil really strong, so then you eat the nutrition through the plants and the vegetables. But it's hard to find biodynamic food. So organic, you see the label everywhere. But what I have to say about organics is that you're not eating the pesticides if it's non-organic. If it's non-organic, you're putting pesticides in your body. And that's what's scary to me, because when I was in my early 20s, I remember having some health issues, and I started connecting it to pesticides. And I am one of those people that really gets very nervous when it's not organic. And that's my issue, because, you know, we don't live in a perfect world, and I used to eat out before the COVID. So, but now I get to eat at home, and I get to really select the food that I eat. But I don't think people necessarily get the link between the pesticide thing. If it's not organic, you're getting a lot more things in your system that's harder on your system to maintain good health, I think. So that if it's somebody that doesn't care about seeds, but they care about their health, then they could be aware of, like, well, if you're not eating healthy food, then you're not probably going to be as healthy as you want to be.
Yeah, I think that, for me, when I've talked to people, the thing that tends to perk people up to why do I care about seeds is this food to seed connection. And then the understanding that, you know, do you grow your own food? Okay, no. Okay, well, what seeds do your food come from? Do you have any idea? You know, how are they grown and how diverse is it? And, you know, in this era of climate change, I think it's much more prevalent that people are aware of, you know, the fragility of our growing systems. And what then I often do is I link it to seeds, and I say, see, you don't know this, but huge amounts of the farming that's happening in the United States, for instance, is a lot of corn and soy, right? And it's grown from a very, very few varieties. Even outside of the corporate control piece, it's just grown from a very, very few varieties, right? And so all you need, and we know this with COVID actually really well, like one super virus, just like plants, a super bacteria, super virus comes, boom, you know, and we think we are so advanced and so on top of this and, you know, too big to fail, right? But what have the last few years told the human race? And I think that's where people can really connect and say, oh, shoot. And then you can talk about things like seed banks and say, one doomsday seed bank isn't going to cut it. Now, thankfully, Svalbard is not purporting to be the answer. It's a backup for the backups, right? But the reality is every community needs a seed bank, because that's what's truly diverse and resilient. And the same thing with farming systems. The more seed varieties you have, when we do have things like climate change, you've got something that was adapted in the mountains, and you've got something that was adapted in the lowlands, and they can now talk to each other in the sense that they can now be traded and work with each other to, the things that were adapted in the deserts as the heat rises, and now those things can be used in higher regions, and so, but we've relegated that, and Gary Nabhan's very good at this. If you want to read into it more, he's just phenomenal. Like, we've relegated this to the world of academia. We've said this is their problem and they handle my food, and we're very comfortable, especially in the West. This is very like esoteric, but it's really not. If you go to India, you realize it's really not esoteric. This is very foundational. And so I think that really, to me, even before somebody's watched film, now they may be ready to learn more.
Well, I can't speak for everybody, but at least I have been very disconnected from a very young age. And I'm just wondering whether any of the programs that you interviewed about have programs specific for teaching children about seed diversity.
Well, Taggart, I'm thinking of Jane
well-
Goodall with Roots and Shoots. But go ahead.
Well, for example, there's this farm school in Portland, and it's run by Kelly Hogan and Matt. Matt's a permaculturist, and Kelly Hogan is a Waldorf teacher, but she decided during COVID period to teach kindergarten kids farm-based outdoors, so they don't have to be at home in front of a computer and can be on the farm helping with the chickens. They have the goats. They grow all sorts of things, and the kids help out. These sorts of programs are very rare, and hopefully they'll be building in communities all over. I know they exist, especially in Finland and places like that. There's a lot of outdoor schools that they're never inside in a schoolroom. So I love the idea that we're actually getting out there and we have the gear that keep us warm, and we can spend hours and hours outside. So those programs like that, Jane Goodall, believe it or not, is really into, she really fights the GMO issue. She really feels that that we have to protect seeds, and as she protects chimpanzees, she really looks out for kids. And so, as Jon said, Roots and Shoots is a program where it brings the kid into connection with growing things. There's in California, there's so many programs. Alice Waters, the famous chef, they have all sorts of programs for kids in public schools. So it's affordable. It's not just like elitist thing that they're all doing, but it's actually bringing in healthy food grown in these local communities to the school system, so they could grow, they could eat the healthy vegetables that they grow. And I love where kids get very involved. My daughter goes to a Waldorf school in Portland, and they had a great farm, where they, especially kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, they'd go out and help in the garden every day. And, with COVID now, it's just like, I have my 16-year-old now, I have to, convince her to go outside and get her feet wet, and to plant a seed with me. When she was 7 years old, she wanted to help dad all the time. And so hopefully she'll come back as a 16-year-old and say, oh, this is what I want to be doing all the time too, because you can't tell them what to do. 16.
I'll second that too. I mean, my kids are in public school in Portland, and obviously Portland's, an area that's very green in the sense of that word, and so it's going to be a little different. But just the fact that the public school system can, both schools they've been in, one which was definitely a more underserved community, had access to really good gardens. So this is not, it's something that there's growing community support for. And I do think it makes a huge difference. I know for my kids, it has made a big difference to just have that be part of their life. So, I think it was, in a survey that they did of kids, I think it was Australia. I don't remember exactly, Taggart, but, it was like kids thought maybe yogurt grew from, a tree. They didn't know like how, there's just no connection between what the thing is you see in the grocery store and actually where it came from. You know what I mean? Like, how does this get here? What does it come from? And so I think just that helps us. Any connective tissue we can create in our very concrete, increasingly digital realms that our kids are living in. My 3 kids are on laptops, all day long. And it's like anything we can do to get the hands on the soil and connect the food to the land helps us value, that chain. And I think that's super important.
Absolutely. Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I actually did research with like some school gardens up in New York, and we actually saw that like impact on the children. Like after they were gardening and they were growing their own vegetables, they actually were like more willing to eat vegetables and they had a better taste for it because they felt like, oh, I grew this. I have like my hand in it. So I thought that was really interesting. Kind of going off of that last question, how might like more academic institutions be contributing to these problems? Or do you know any university or organizations who are researching heirloom seeds and their positive impacts on our health and ecology versus like more modified hybrid seeds?
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier, the biotech feeders and, how the top brains often get picked up for the highest paying jobs. I think one of the ways that that young people that are in college right now interested in environmental sciences or studying and really have the brains to go into these great, seed breeders and become these masters of this art. One of the ways that you can simply aid social justice in this sense is to there were stories printed of top minds saying no to the big contracts given by AgriCorps and instead putting their energy into whether it's open source seeds, they call it, meaning that these are seed development programs with top minds and top breeders that won't be patented, that are always going to be kept in the commons. And so I think it was University of Minnesota where the open source seed project is, if you want to look into that. But that's some areas that I would look into where there are academics that are very, very conscious of the overall structures and are sort of seeking to radically alter by growing. This is all slow growth. I mean, we know this in the environmental movement. It's a slow movement building that's going to probably be generational, and so it's not the glory of like suddenly you're going to fix it all. It's growing movements of people that are concerned and are enlightened to understand that these systems are destroying our land. These systems are removing our agency. And it's not just a left and right situation. The interesting thing about seed is that, you had this interesting odd bedfellows, right? Of the preppers and the libertarians could get on board with seed preservation because it's about their sovereignty and about their rights. You know what I mean? Like, and likewise, so you get actually people talking to each other that I think can be really constructive because this is all for our common good, And so where our hope is that the film would inspire people that are pursuing these kind of programs, to think differently about the bigger picture, not just the paycheck.
And I really commend the open seed source. The open seed source is the way to keep those seeds free, that they could never be patented. And that is I think it's University of Wisconsin where they developed that source. And there's a lot of academics that are behind that. And Bill Mcdormand, who's in the film, he's all about the seed, open seed source, where you could get, if you could get hundreds or thousands of different seeds that are actually protected, they even have to go to the point where they have to patent it, but in a way that's different. They're using the same laws that GMO lawyers use to patent their seeds. They're using it to patent open source, that they could never be developed on a commercial level and owned. So I love that law could be used, to protect something, to be free and open. But there is there's things like CRISPR. I don't know if you've heard of that, but there's a lot of things going on. I don't quite understand it. That's beyond GMO. That's really taking, parts of the plant and saying we own that color purple in that cauliflower. And who could own a color? I mean, it's just incredible. And then, if a farmer is growing that seed and it has that color in it, that farmer might be afraid they're going to be sued by a company that put a patent on that variety. So open seed source doesn't do that, and it keeps it free. My feeling is that even in the organic seed movement, they're getting into the patent world too. So this is really against what Bill Mcdormand or Vandana Shiva or Rowan White, who's in the film, Gunther Hawk. None of these people want seeds to be patented at all, because really seeds are the source of life and they need to be free and open. And that's where big seed banks, conversation around seed banks are really interesting. Like Svalbard, as you know, is, up in the Arctic Circle, and it's many countries keep their seeds in those seed banks, but the average person can't get to those seeds. It's for big companies or big countries that have their seeds there. So it's a great backup. I mean, I think it's really wonderful. But as we know, even Svalbard is vulnerable to climate change. The permafrost actually melted and there was flooding that was going on. It didn't hurt the seeds, but we know that things could wipe out a seed bank. As we saw in the film, in Iraq, I mean, US destroyed during war one of the most amazing seed banks in the world, the Middle East. And it's all gone. And that's why these little, as John said before, why it's really important to have local seed banks that aren't big and flashy the Svalbard, but more like native seed source down in Arizona that holds hundreds of different varieties of peppers, like hot peppers and sweet peppers and corn source, that they actually saved. Gary Nabham, who is amazing, in the 60s, he started collecting seeds because he saw the native people were not saving the seeds, or the elders were afraid that the seeds weren't going to be saved. So he started saving them and put it into their small but growing seed bank. And everything was in freezers, bottles and freezers, and it wasn't fancy at all. And as you know, Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa, Ken, and they were saving seeds in the 70s when all these people were losing their seeds, or afraid if they died, their seed source was going to disappear. So they started saving all these rare heirloom seeds. And if they didn't, we would have so few diversity left. So we have to thank these people that have done it before us. So thank God, by the time we made the film, there were 96% loss. but there's seeds coming back. There's new varieties being formed. And I think there's a lot of hope as long as we keep the resilient local communities growing seeds. We can't just put it in the hands of the big corporations.
Right. Yeah. I think even like the metaphor that exists from the largest bank in the world being entirely inaccessible to the entire human population just kind of speaks volumes as to why we all need to be keeping seeds, just in the event of the predictable.
Yeah.
Not to be a pessimist about it, but someone in the chat asked a really, really great question. And so they asked, do you stay in contact with the farmers and seed keepers who were interviewed in the movie?
No, that's a great question. We have kept in touch with some of them for many years, some of them less so as time goes by. But I'll let you speak to Bill Taggart because that's a great story. But it's been fun connecting. First of all, as you watch film, you'll see these are sea keepers, but they're also personalities. These people are fun to watch, and when you make a film, you're trying to get people that can be storytellers, and you're trying to find people that are doing both the people that are doing really great work and the people that are really fantastic at delivering it. And the last I've talked to many of the seed keepers in the film, the film was a swell for some of them in terms of being able to talk to new people, which we are really happy about, that it helped draw people to their initiatives and what they're doing. So yeah, it was really good to work with all of them. I know that it's an up and down journey for many of them too, and sometimes you talk to somebody a little later and things haven't worked out as well, and so this is one of the biggest things, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, is get in touch with your local seed keepers. Chances are you'll find out they're as cool as some of the people in this film. The people that care passionately about this issue are around in many, many, many communities. They can just be a little hard to find, but once you do, you'll find they're like sages full of wisdom, many of them. And I think one of the most fun things for us in the story was, as we would sometimes do panels like this with a seed keeper from the film, that you just hear all this incredible history, and this rich history of this, seed keeper who passed away, and they would find seeds in little coffee tins in the attic, and find things tucked away, and almost like obsessive level saving, like Will Bonzel in the film, right? He's in his attic, and it's like an obsessive level of, you're like, are you a hoarder? Do we need to get some help here? And it's like, no, they're just so in love with, they just don't want to let any of it go, because there is a very real sense that they are carrying so much history. But Taggart, why don't you talk about Bill?
Bill Mcdormand, I grew up with him in Sun Valley, Idaho, and he's older, but when we were starting to make Seed the Untold Story, somebody from home, Ketchum, Idaho, told me oh, do you know Bill? Like, yeah, I know Bill. Bill's a cool guy. Well, he's the director of Native Seed Source down in Tucson, Arizona, where they had all the native seeds and chilies and things like that. And so I got in touch with Bill, and he was so excited because a lot of these people have never been filmed that much. I mean, it's incredible because they weren't in the limelight, except for people like Vandana Shiva. Of course, she was in the limelight, but a lot of the smaller seed keepers, like a lot of the smaller beekeepers, had never been filmed. So they're so excited to have the camera turn to them. And so we went down to Arizona, and Bill basically opened the doors for us to film anything in the seed bank. And John, you'd pull out, bags of seeds, and of course we were very careful with them, but it was kind of like, oh my God, we're in the heart of these seeds that are so precious. And so Bill started Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, and I love being in touch with him and donating to that seed company, so to speak. It's not a company, it's a nonprofit, and they go and train lots of growers. So if you want to be a seed keeper and go to school for that, you go through Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance. And he has like Don Tipping teaching and Rowan White. Listen, follow Rowan White on Facebook or on Instagram. Rowan White tells the most beautiful stories about her Mohawk upbringing and her connection with her seeds and mostly her corn. And she shares almost daily these beautiful stories. And she's also part of Seed Savers Exchange. So I love staying in touch. In fact, Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance, I have a little farm, Southern Oregon, and they asked me if I wanted to grow some kamut, an old wheat. And I was very excited. They gave me like, you know, a little like container of kamut wheat, which is very rare, this kamut wheat. And I grew it in Portland at that little school farm where the little kids are. We grew it there, and I grew it in Southern Oregon. And in Portland, it actually grew very well. And we got a small container. It wasn't a lot, but they could then use those seeds and say, okay, this kamut is now starting to adapt to the climate and the soil in Portland. And then they give those seeds to people in this region from half the seeds that I returned to them. In Southern Oregon, it was a disaster. Not one seed survived. The turkeys, the wild turkeys came in, they ate them, and the soil wasn't that good. And I was just like, God, I would starve to death if I was a farmer. Like it's hard work. You have to learn so much. So yes, I do stay in touch with some. Will Bonzel, who's the beginning of the film, he's such a character, and I want to get back in touch with him and see how he's doing, because he was really worried that, you know, if there's going to be a fire in his house up in the attic where he stores all his seeds, like, would he save his family or would he save the seeds? And, you know, he was talking about like how he would have to protect the seeds, of course. And then, you know, even like Joe Simcox, that's the wild guy that travels all around the, you know, Africa and Central America and South America. He's a wild guy. I don't stay in touch with him, but you could probably see some things that he does. He's the one that's so passionate about anything he finds. And he's just like, that's what the greatest joy making this film with Jon was, like, we found these people that have never been filmed and they're so excited and beautiful.
Yeah, last thing I'll plug with Bill is Bill and Bell Starr, his partner, put together, helped us with a really, you know, when we were in the heart of getting this film out and still getting it out, we really cared about community engagement. We do really care about community engagement and impact. And so if you go to seedthemovie.com, there's a educational curriculum, there's a guide there that him and Bell worked so hard to build, and you guys, it's incredible. Like, if you have more questions after this film, or after this webinar, just go to the Take Action page on the website, and there's a seed discussion guide. And it's like, I forget how many pages long it is. I mean, it's in depth. We really went there on a lot of these issues, so you can really look and get a little more sourced information and a little more in depth on all sorts of issues. I think we focused it into what to know about GMOs, biodiversity loss in our seeds, save our seeds, how we can bring back seed sovereignty, corporate consolidation, pesticide issues and impact. So it's really comprehensive. And Bill was really close with us in this whole process, making this film. He in a way, wouldn't you say, Taggart, he was kind of our guide into this world, you know? And when you make a film as documentary filmmakers, when you dive into a new subject, it's like thrilling, it's an adventure. But you're like not an expert, right? Like even having us interviewed here, you know, we become knowledgeable through making the film, but they're the real experts, you know? And so finding Bill was so pivotal. The film couldn't have possibly been made without Bill. You know, he really connected us to this fabric. And he's been really big on, the Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance is really been on a mission to network these seed savers together, because part of the problem was they were all doing their thing. Well, it used to be everybody was a seed saver, right? And then as you know, we came into modernity and farming got relegated to a few and got relegated to academia. Now you don't even know where they live. And then it was the 70s and Carrie Fowler and Gary Nabhan and Diana Wheatley and all these people kind of back to the landers that were rediscovering something that was barely nearly going to be lost, right? Their grandparents' generation sort of held this and they brought it back. And so Bill is, his big mission is networking so that we know who each other are in the seed saving world.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think you guys like still keeping in touch with a lot of these people really speaks to the fact that this whole seed saving thing is really a community, and that's what it really should be. Have you ever personally tasted some of these lesser known breeds of corn or other vegetables, or even those like beautiful beans that were in the movie? And do they taste differently than the versions most people know? And do you think that the taste of these crops has anything to do with the survival in our diets?
Well, you know, the fact that the Goto Kosaman, Winona LaDuke talking about this ancient seed, and then tasting, I wish I could share the squash with you right now. And it is so sweet and so yummy and so vibrant that I feel like I'm eating something that holds the DNA of this ancient, more wild flavors. And Vandana Shiva often talked about flavors are in the heirloom seeds. Not only flavors, but then the nutrition and the tastes and the varieties that are more indigenous are so much richer because they don't have to be shipped around. They're not, you know, a tomato that's like rock hard that will survive in the shipping and it tastes like nothing. And so there is a movement, of course, in farmers markets where you're getting these like, you know, lima beans or different squashes and tomatoes and fruits that are so much more tasty. Look at the apples you could find now. I mean, it's so much more than in the 80s or 90s for me. It was just like, you could find a few different kind of varieties. Now you could find like at least 20 different varieties in some organic stores. So yes, the flavor is like so important when it's older varieties.
One of the first things that we did in filming was to kind of go to like a hub to find people. And the hub was what's called the Heirloom Expo. And it's held down in kind of the Napa Valley area in California. And the incredible variety of vegetables. You know, I didn't even know how they look, the bright colors, radishes with pink and white shooting through them in rings, and like just the purple potatoes and, you know, everything, and giant, who can grow the biggest pumpkin. It's like an old farm, you know, festival that would be in, you know, a small town that like, you know, all this competitions. And it was just really refreshing to realize there are people that, like, I get it, not all of that is necessarily the most productive or the most, you know, transportable, but that's not the point. The point is that our food comes in all these different varieties, and we should maintain them because, you know, every foodie knows that it's nice to see something beautiful on your plate, and it's fun to play around, and it's exciting, and there's no reason, just because we also need to feed the world doesn't mean we like get rid of all of that and live in concrete buildings. Do you still hang paintings on your wall? Like, you know, we need beauty. And so, yeah, for us going to that first, to me, it just exploded my mind. You could taste all these different melons and all of these, and it's wild, the difference. Up in just north of us in Washington State, they have an apple festival, where everybody brings in all these different varieties of apples. And so if you think you've tasted an apple, you've probably tasted like a Red Delicious or a Fuji, or, you know, to sit in like there 500 different kinds of apples, you know, like it really is amazing. And that, I think we were talking about ways to be compelled. That's another way to compel, right? Through our stomach, like to understand that the different seeds really are special.
And just to add to that, Vandana Shiva said in small communities in India, they would eat 150 different varieties of things. And now it's down to, you know, it's getting, we eat maybe 6 different varieties, you know, it's like so minimal, but they traditionally, with all the herbs and all the different vegetables they have in India, that the more variety, the healthier your community will be. So, and just what Lee from the Hopi Nation, he's, you know, he said, you know, the seeds are my children. I love them. I will not throw out, if they grow a teeniest little like blue corn, he will not throw any of those kernels out. They're part of his heritage, his ancestors, his people. And so he says, you know, white men, they're all obsessed about bigger and better. But he says, no, just this little seed is just full of love and history for us. So that's how I would like to live. But I'm you know, slowly but surely, hopefully I'll get even more connected to more seeds.
Yeah, thank you. It's really such a beautiful message to have in the film, and just a beautiful film overall. We are at the end of the event, so I just want to thank you both for being here so much, Jon and Taggart. This has been amazing. CNS is so excited to have had you for this event. Is there anything else you guys want to say, or some closing remarks, possibly where people can find you or what you're up to now? Yeah, we'd love to hear that before wrapping up.
Well, I'll just throw in that, you know, if you haven't had a chance to see the film, definitely go to seedthemovie.com. You can get it on most of the streaming services, or you can get it right from the website there. Just rent it, watch it with your family, watch it with a friend. It's not a typical documentary. You'll enjoy watching it with a friend. It's a lot of fun. So that's where you can learn more. There's also all of our resources are there as well. And if you know an educator that would like this, at collectiveye.org, you can, educators can buy it to use in the classroom as well. And they would be happy to work with you. So.
Yes, and watch the trilogy. Start with The Real Dirt on Farmer John, go to Queen of the Sun, and then Seed the Untold Story. And you'll see the whole, like, The Real Dirt on Farmer John is an incredible story about this farmer. You'll be so inspired after, but it is a journey. It really takes you on a journey. So enjoy these films that are meant for you. You know, I don't want to just put it in my basement. So I want it for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much again. And just to say, if you enjoyed See the Untold Story and want to learn more about the need for sustainability in our food system, we invite you to enroll in the Food and Sustainability course offered by the Center of Nutrition Studies at UCornell. And you can find more information about that at nutritionstudies.org and in the link that I provided in the chat. But yeah, I just want to say thank you again, you two, so much for being here with us today, and everybody who joined us tonight. But yeah, thank you again, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.